What's going on, guys? Nathan here with a Team Fortress 2 gameplay commentary in the year 2024. That's right. I feel like I'm a part of the Jumanji "What year is it" meme releasing a gameplay commentary in 2024 just because our internet landscape has shifted so much to shorts and TikToks and all that stuff. But I wanted to make a video just assessing the overall health of Team Fortress 2 as a game in 2024. The reason is that, I originally sort of got my start on YouTube with Team Fortress 2. It's the only game that I've had a large amount of success in terms of uploading content, and for that reason, it's pretty close to my heart. So I wanted to just make a video to assess where we're at. I have a grading scale that I put together here out of 10 points, and so I'd like to step through some of these different grades. But before I do, I want to give a quick shout out to a Reddit user, EVDoke, I believe is how it's pronounced. About a year ago, he created this Reddit post reimagining the TF2 characters as cards in Magic the Gathering, and I think this is super cute and just absolutely something that I wish would be legal, because it would just be fun with all the Universes Beyond stuff. We've got, we're playing Gimli and Aragorn, and so why not introduce the Scout? So anyway, jumping into the grading scale, I want to provide a quick caveat that this is more assessing the health of a game from the perspective of, is it dying or not? This is not a game review per se, where there would be other things graded, such as aesthetics, graphics, things like that, sound. This is a scorecard on, is the game holding up over time? Now, I have 4 general categories here. The first is player count, the second is technical and support, the third is fun factor, and the fourth is new player onboarding. The first one I'd like to cover here is player count, and within my 10-point grading scale, this has the possibility of earning 1 point. It's just a 0 or 1 because I feel that a game, especially multiplayer, is just not playable if it doesn't have a healthy player base. And the caveat is that a player base is often a factor of these other categories, and so this is really sort of a grade, but also just a general review of, hey, are people still playing this game, and what does that number look like? So for that, I wanted to delve into some stats really quickly. As I record this, January 23rd of 2024, Team Fortress 2 is currently the number 6 most played game on the Steam charts, which actually is quite shocking, considering that this game was released in 2007. So I pulled in some data from steamcharts.com, which has the average players in a given month tracked over time in addition to the peak players. And what we're seeing is that in 2021, the average players in a given month for TF2 across all months was 89,290 players. In 2022, this number decreased to 86,769, which is a change of about 2,500. And in 2023, we are back up to 88,186 players, which is a decrease of 1,100 from 2021, but an increase from 2022. For the peak players, we went from 119,719 to 118,730 to then 139,231. So we're actually seeing quite a big spike in the peak players in 2023. So we can see that for any game, regardless of what genre it might be, that this game is still very popular, and not only is it very popular, it's exceptionally popular, logging in at number 6 on the Steam charts. So I think that there is currently just a strong appetite for this game, and therefore I'm going to give this a 1 out of 1 on the point scale. Moving on to our second category, we have technical and support. Now, this is going to be broken up into 3 different categories. First, we have hackers and cheating, which is worth 1 point within the category. System and network performance, which is worth another point. And then just a general category for bugs, which is worth one additional point. Now, the hackers and cheating category is the elephant in the room when it comes to TF2, and this is quite honestly the biggest knock I have against the game at the moment. I'd like to record some data, which I'll throw up on the screen, to actually prove my point from a numerical perspective. But because I'm recording this video before I can collect that data, I'll just say that anecdotally, between 1 in every 4 and 1 in every 6 matches seem to be infested with a bot or a hacker. Now, here's where I would like to give kudos to where they are due, in that the player community seems to really band together to vote kick the bots out of the server. But the problem lies in when there are multiple of them in a match and the vote kick timer is on cooldown. And this is a very easy fix from a development perspective. You would simply take out that cooldown so that players can theoretically just vote kick an individual whenever they want. You know, there's some potential for abuse there, especially when bots start figuring out how to do that. So I guess maybe that's not a perfect solution, but the problem seems to be when multiple bots will invade a server, making it very difficult to kick all of them before they can affect the outcome of a match, and B, when there are people who will hit decline on the vote kick option, whether that's from a bot or maybe a player, but there needs to be a harsher sentence or a harsher punishment for these bot accounts. And it makes it even tough too, because TF2 is a free-to-play game, so you can really just make as many accounts as you want. But this really comes down to Valve's lack of support over the years, and to be honest, they don't truly have a financial reason to incentivize further development and support in this area, just because the source engine is, so old and it's been hacked. So the only thing I could think of to really address that would be, from a player standpoint, to really just stop spending any money in TF2, to send a message with your wallet. Vote with your wallet and say, hey, we're not going to give any money to this game until they can fix their cheating problem. Beyond that, it's really tough. All I can say is that the player base needs to continue to rally to ban these accounts, because it is just an absolute problem. And so for that reason, I'm giving this category a 0 out of 1. Next, we'll move on to system and network performance. I think this is always good to grade for a game as it goes along, because there can be an evolution in system performance, and I'm mainly thinking of Cyberpunk 2077 when I think of this example where on release it was maybe absolute garbage, but then it gets better over time. And I think with so much time in the oven, TF2 is fantastic. Your average Valve server always has great connectivity, and caveat is that I'm in the central US. I can't speak to either European servers or Australian servers, for example, but for the Midwest, it's always pretty great, and everything seems to be running pretty smoothly from a frame rate perspective, given they've had more than 10 years to basically optimize the frame rate, the performance, and the network. So for that reason, this category gets a 1 out of 1. And finally, I'd like to just cover bugs briefly. This is another category that benefits from just time being released and the lengthy amount of support that Valve has provided for TF2 back in the day. I still run into one bug in particular, which is if you open the chat and then I don't know exactly what happens, but if you were to spam several keys at once or click around multiple times while the chat is open, sometimes it will freeze where the game is locked into a chat that you can't actually type in or exit out of, and so it forces a system close that you have to alt tab and then close it via the task manager. So that one I still run into every once in a while, but other than that, really haven't encountered any bugs. Back in the day, they used to be fixing like areas where you could build sentries. I still remember the days when you could build sentries in Spawn, and I think even now on a couple maps, I'm thinking of Barn Blitz in particular. I think the pyro can still spray the flame particles through the spawn door into the blue spawn. So that's still a thing. But other than that, I mean, there's really not any game crashing bugs that I'm aware of or that I've experienced in the past year or two. And so for that reason, this category gets a 1 out of 1. And now we move on into arguably our most important category, the fun factor. Now, I've tried to grade these a little bit differently. I've weighted 2 points into two of these three categories, but this I broke up into three subcategories called core gameplay loop, worth 2 points, gameplay loop replayability, worth 2 points, and balance, aka the salt factor, which is worth 1 point. Now, for the core gameplay loop, I think TF2 still has an incredibly strong value proposition from a gameplay loop perspective. In fact, it is so strong that we actually saw Overwatch just straight copy the payload game mode in addition to other game modes like capture points. But honestly, payload continues to be my most favorite game mode where, everybody starts in spawn. Ultimately, it comes down to a competition with deathmatch to see, okay, can we control a moving area while adjusting our what is essentially the equivalent of changing spawn rate timers. That's sort of the beauty of payload that I find from a competitive perspective, is that it gives you a sliding scale in terms of how much a team can actually push the cart, knowing that there are certain elements of the map that must be overcome. And from a competitive perspective as well, payload allows the teams to adjust their spawn timers to adjust for the skill difference. So for example, the reason why blue team always pushes out the payload when the payload is right near their spawn is because they literally have a lower distance to walk to get to the point that they are capturing. Whereas the more that the payload is pushed, the more that red has the advantage of basically just being able to walk out of their spawn, which also represents unlimited health and ammo, to capture the point. So I still think that this gameplay loop in 2024 is very solid. And then if we were to even look at other game modes such as King of the Hill, that's always a blast and favors certain classes that might not be favored by something as standardized as payloads. For example, Spy and Scout are much more viable with King of the Hill, and it gives Engineer a different sort of dynamic to where he might want to set up his sentry and things like that. And then for control points, often it becomes, can we bust through the enemy's defenses with one giant push that might require a little bit more team coordination and especially timing coordination with things like Ubers when you're fighting often 2 to 3 level 3 sentries. So, in that core gameplay loop, it always feels good to be getting kills. You always feel like you are contributing when you're on the point. I think they do a good job of just making kills satisfying. For example, there's a special noise when you crit on the sniper. The classes all feel very unique, which I'll cover in just a second with the replayability factor, and it just feels satisfying when you're able to outsmart your opponent. Just a quick commentary just on the overall combat mechanics in TF2. I'm a big fan of the time it takes to get kills. One of the reasons why I'm not as much of a fan of Counter-Strike is because you die so fast, where it feels like you haven't had a chance to really outsmart your opponent, and it's more about kind of flicking in terms of aiming. TF2 has a little bit of that, obviously with the sniper, but there are opportunities to outsmart your opponent by outmaneuvering them, by just better map knowledge in terms of knowing where health packs are, that I appreciate more in TF2, that lends itself to that gameplay loop a little bit more, where if you actually know know the map, if you actually know the limitations of each class and the weapons within each class, that you can actually outmaneuver your opponent into winning a 1v1. For example, if you are a very good scout, you can pretty much take on any class in the game minus a level 3 sentry. And so I think that comes through very well. And maybe we're getting into the balance category a little bit, but I just wanted to comment on the fact that combat still feels great, and that has not worn off throughout the years. So for that reason, this category gets a 2 out of 2. Next, we'll step into the gameplay loop replayability. So this is very important in retaining players. I think that with 9 classes that each feel very unique, there's a lot to play with. You have a lot of toys for each class in terms of each class will get, a variety of different weapons. And I think that's where Overwatch suffered just a little bit, is that you didn't have as many weapons to select from. If you were like Lucio, for example, you didn't have different weapons to play with, whereas in TF2, if you want to heal differently, you might choose between the Vaccinator versus the Kritzkrieg versus the Uber, depending on who you're facing. And so TF2 does a much, much better job of offering just different combinations of playstyles that you can try out. And each class really has its own playstyle. I think that feels genuinely unique. For example, the Heavy will always just feel slow and sluggish, and you do have a lot of health, but you're also a bigger hitbox, and so you feel a little bit tanky, and especially when you have a medic. But outside of that, you really feel where you're being countered via spies, via snipers, and even potentially like direct hit soldiers. Whereas if you're playing spy, you know exactly what your class counters are, such as pyro, scout, things like that. And so there's just a lot of rock paper scissors going on that I think really lends itself to great replayability. I'll just comment too with on the weapons piece. There's such a large spectrum between play styles. For example, there is a whole, essentially a 10th class introduced into the game via Demo Knight, which plays just completely differently from a normal Demo Man. And if you wanted to run Force of Nature, for example, that would lend itself more to maps that might allow you to knock enemies off of cliffs. So there's just every sort of way you can combine your tools in your toolbox to really just keep the game fresh. And I'm constantly trying out new weapons to this day, even without new weapons being released in years and years, and finding out new ways that I like to play the game. For example, I actually booted up a new Pyro class where I was using, I think, just the default flamethrower, or maybe it was the Phlogistinator with the Scorch Shot and the Power Jack, where all I wanted to do was annoy the snipers on the enemy team. It was a situation where there were like 4 enemy snipers that were just really good, and if you light the snipers on fire, they can't aim nearly as well because their cursor bounces off of the flames. So I had a lot of fun just with that, just for annoying a particular part of the enemy team, and doing so I was able to help my own team with that. So just a ton of replayability, and for that reason this category gets a 2 out of 2. And finally, we'll move on to the balance category. There's 2 components to this that I'll just briefly touch on: the class balance and the weapon balance. The class balance, I think, is pretty good in TF2. However, when it comes down to it, I think we all pretty much know what the best classes in the game are, because we can take a look at what 6v6 teams are doing in competitive, which is running soldiers, running demo men, and running medics and snipers. Additionally, I think that can be backed up just by, if you had to choose a Highlander team, but without the restriction of having one class within the team, then you would immediately probably drop a couple different classes, namely Pyro, perhaps Engineer, and perhaps even the Scout, depending on the skill level that you're talking about. And I would replace those classes with soldiers and demo men, and I think you would have a better team as a result. So, that point is very debatable. I totally understand, the arguments against that. But the point I'm trying to make is that when it comes down to it, soldier and demo man are both the best damage dealing classes. We all know it. And it's not really a problem though, because we run into so much variety in your average server where people don't always want to be playing those classes, and so I don't think it's really a problem. Then we touch on the weapon balance, which I think TF2 actually does a respectable job at keeping the weapons pretty fair. There's a lot of side grades when it comes down to the stock weapons, and if I'm being honest, I think the stock weapons in most cases are still the best weapon choice. Now, there's some exceptions, like on heavy, you're almost never going to run a shotgun as your secondary, but if you were to look at soldier, for example, the default rocket launcher, the shotgun, and the shovel, are arguably the best weapons that he has. The shovel is probably the most questionable, to be honest, because I would much rather run the whip or the escape plan. But in terms of the actual damage dealing devices, a demo man, sticky bomb launcher, and the default pipe bomb launcher are the best. Medic, your Uber gun is the best, and scout, the scatter gun is the best. So it's great. I think that the stock weapons are pretty much always the best that you're going to choose, and there are a lot of side grids that you can play with from there depending on what you want to do. So the weapons I don't think are imbalanced at all. I think they're very fair, and so when we combine that with the class rating, I think that this category will receive its full 1 point out of 1. Now, our last category involves new player onboarding, which is very essential to maintaining the longevity of a game. There will inevitably be players that cycle off of the game and play other games, but the first category that I like to sort of grade this on is the learning curve, and then there is the financial commitment. So with the learning curve, I think that TF2 is very solid in terms of providing just not a lot of things that you need to learn up front in order to start playing and having a good time. There's the tutorial that you can take, but what I'm really sort of comparing this to is other popular games nowadays. So for example, something like League of Legends, there's just so much to know in terms of all of the champions, all of the abilities, all of the items. How do you actually build all of these champions? Whereas in TF2, you really just hit the main menu, you hit join game, and you have your selection of 9 classes that you need to learn about, but you can really just jump right in. And with an FPS, everybody pretty much knows what's going on, and there haven't been a ton of weapons that have been released, so you might have a bit of a learning curve in terms of learning what different weapons there are. However, kind of going back to that point about stock weapons being the best, a lot of players will run stock weapons, so there isn't a ton to really learn about once you understand those, and you can kind of innately understand what a class wants to be doing within the game. Just the fact that the spy can goes invisible and has a knife tells you that this is a very slippery class that will want to obviously get behind enemy lines and utilize the backstab mechanic. Everybody knows what a sniper does. A heavy is very much a frontline class, and things like that. So I think that the learning curve is very reasonable to onboard new players, and given that sort of the population of gamers continues to age, and pretty much everybody that's young nowadays plays a large amount of video games compared to 20 years ago, I think that players can just generally pick up the mechanics very quickly, even including some more advanced mechanics like market gardening or rocket jumping or things along those lines. So for that reason, learning curve gets a 1 out of 1. Now, finally, I'd like to comment on the financial commitment of TF2. One of the barriers to onboarding players often is just the microtransactions that are necessary to get you up to a competitive level to compete with other players. And I think this is just where TF2 is just fantastic. Like I've mentioned, the game is free to play. The stock weapons generally are the best, and I think Valve has a very good system set up in terms of item drops, where if you want to just play the game and gradually unlock certain weapons, albeit it's randomized, so it's not a great system just if you're only relying on the weapon drop system. However, you will over time unlock more weapons, and then if you want to really spend the money to unlock all the weapons quicker. You can spend the money to just buy the weapons from the Steam marketplace or something like that. And so there really isn't that much of a financial commitment, especially if you just want to run stock. I mean, that's totally acceptable in a casual server, and you will still have fun either way. So I think the financial commitment for a new player is pretty decent. And what I'm a little bit concerned with as I sort of just talk about this out loud is that there might be some bias that I have having all of the weapons already. Maybe I'm just sort of biased to that sense of, oh, that death was unfair because he had a different weapon than me. So there maybe is that, and I suppose I don't have that actual new player perspective. However, as I look to, if you're starting out with just brand new stock weapons, I think you can still be competitive if you are good mechanically. Like, the weapon selection will not be the piece that holds you back tremendously. It will be more your skill level. And so that's where I'm thinking, the new weapons are important, but they're not game breaking by any means. And in fact, you could run stock for a month at a time and still have fun and enjoy that core gameplay loop. So for that reason, I will give this category a 1 out of 1. Now, finally, we wrap up our final ratings just with some closing thoughts. So we tallied up a score of 9 out of 10, which I think puts TF2 in the excellent, but still needs work category. And we've already touched on the elephant in the room. Valve just needs to get their crap together with these bots. I am so sick of seeing bots in matches, and there has to be an easier way to prevent, 1 out of every 5 matches from ending with a bot being kicked over and over again because they just keep coming back or they invade. And this is, again, I mean, TF2 is an old game, so I mean, really, the solution would be to release something in a new game engine that hasn't quite been solved like the Source engine has been. And I mean, honestly, I have no idea why they have not actually been developing Team Fortress 3, because we can see that TF2, which was released in 2007, is still number 6 most played game on Steam. Or if they were to release Team Fortress 3 with the exact same business model, but an actual game engine that has not been broken, I mean, that would absolutely stay right in that top level. If you literally copied and pasted all of the assets and all of the mechanics just into a new game, maybe with updated graphics and updated anti-cheat software, I think that they could accomplish a giant player base, and there's just so much potential there, but Valve does not pursue it. And so as a result, we have to deal with this bot problem. I just wanted to, wrap up this video with the fact that this game has somehow defied all the odds of staying alive throughout the years. Most games are lucky if they last, 5 years, let alone almost 20. I mean, within 3 years, TF2 will be 20 years old. Let that sink in for a second. That's incredible. That's in the all-time greats of like World of Warcraft, RuneScape, all of these old games that just keep chugging along. So anyway, closing thoughts over. I just wanted to say that this game is great and I still love it and I still play it when I'm itching for a more casual shooter. So that will be the video, guys. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like. It always helps with the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe for future videos like this. I may be posting some more Team Fortress 2 content. However, I am trying to emphasize or upload more Magic the Gathering content these days. So your viewership and also your level of engagement with this video, I think, will sort of help inform me of whether I should produce more content like this in the future, which is certainly something that I'm open to. So that is the video. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully I will see you all in the next one.